Namaskar, good morning, good day, good evening to those in India. We are going to begin our chat in a few minutes. But here with me, just to get you guys grounded, and here with me is my co-conspirator, co-researcher, and my dear wife, Ashwini. And she said she wanted to say a few words to you before I get into my monologue. Okay, so here is Ashwini.
Namaskar and welcome to all of you. Please feel free to ask as many questions to Nilesh, and we shall respond. It will be a pleasure to respond to all of you, to all your questions. If time does not permit, please email to him and he will respond. Thank you for joining us and have a good time and a good chat with him. Thank you. Bye.
All right, so we will give a few minutes before we start the chat. So try to get few systems done here, so the volume is right. And keep in mind that Murphy is always lurking around. So I have a good internet connection. Everything seems to be right on this side. But you know what? If something is going to go wrong, it will. And please stay put through that. I don't expect the connection to go down, but you never know. If that happens, I will reconnect, and so stay put. Okay. All right. So let's give a few minutes for for a few others to join, and then I will start with the introduction, and I'll give you a quick agenda how this will go. Okay. So some of the few things, if you can hear me, please let me know that you are comfortable and you could hear both of us. Ashwini joined for first few minutes. All right, so I am reading some of your comments. Thank you all for joining. All right, so okay, so we'll give another minute or so. All right, so yes, we'll give some others to join sometime. So please, I think you could hear me, and that's great. And just make sure that we get a few things right here in terms of volume, and we will be ready to go. Okay, very good. All right, I have kept a glass of water next to me. Okay, so let's begin, and keep in mind that many others will be joining this. So namaskar, and welcome to my first Facebook live chat. Now, this is organized by Indic Book Club. And they have organized many such similar Facebook live chats. So it's not first for them. And I want to request all of you after this chat to go and visit indicbookclub.com and look at some of the wonderful things that they are doing. Now, Indic Book Club is a brainchild of Sri Harikiranji. And he has put a lot of effort, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of resources around this Indic Book Club, and there are many volunteers who are working tirelessly to make this a success. So please go visit indicbookclub.bookclub.com. And the media partners for this Indic Book Club chat series, you would know these names. One is Swarajya magazine. It's an online magazine. And please, again, most of you would be familiar with it. But if not, please go and visit it. The other media partner is Creative India magazine. And I would also encourage you to visit them as well. And before I forget, and I forget a lot of things. So before I forget, there is another announcement that I have to make. And in this, in this Facebook live chat series, there is going to be a Independent Day special. And Independent Day, because the audience is going to be global, let me specify the Independent Day referring to 15th of August, the India's independence from British. There is going to be a Independent Day special live chat. Now it will be not on 15th, but it will be on 6th of August. And it will be a surprise chat in terms of who will be on the chat. So please join that chat as well. Look for announcement. But mark your calendars, 6th of August, Independent Day special, Facebook live chat, again organized by Indic Book Club. All right. So with that, what I want to do is give you some background of how I got into this research on the chronology of Mahabharata war. What my plan is to go for, say, maybe around 20 minutes. And you can ping me there and stop me if I go too far after that. And give you some background, how I arrived at this, what led me to do this similar work that is being done by many other researchers. And so why one more researcher needs to do this. And then what I want you to do is after say 15 minutes or so, or as I cover some of the aspects, start typing your questions, because that is the idea. The idea is that you actually ask questions as a part of this online chat, and I will try to answer them, as many as I can, during the chat. And those I may not able to address, I will definitely answer them in this particular Facebook live feed after the chat is over. Okay, so you will still get some brief answers. Sometime I will just connect you to some blog article that I might have written or sometime I may connect you to a YouTube chat or some video of my presentation given at some conference with specific time slots. And I might say, well, just listen to it for these specific minutes and it answers your question. So this is about listening to me for first 20 minutes or so, and then please ask questions, okay? As many questions as you like, any questions as it relates to Mahabharata. If you can focus on chronology, that's great. But if it's related to Mahabharata but not chronology, that's fine too. Now, I am not going to claim that I know the answers to all the questions. In fact, there are many questions that we don't know the answers, even in chronology and any other areas. And there are some that we will never know the answers. But what is wonderful about this scientific methodology is that even when we think we will not able to find answers to some of the toughest questions, it's amazing how much actually we can know about it. So with that, let me begin with how this all started. So my interest in Mahabharata actually began with Bhagavad Gita. And as all of you know, Bhagavad Gita is a part of the Mahabharata text. So from one thing led to another, and I said, all right, I have read Bhagavad Gita many times, different translations. I had listened to, I have read Vinoba's 18 lectures, given in Dhule prison in 1932, the talks on Gita. And I said, okay, so I have a reasonable idea as to what is there in Bhagavad Gita in terms of the content. And since it's part of Mahabharata, let me see what else you see in the rest of the Mahabharata and how cohesive it is, how congruent it is with the message of Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita together. So that's how my journey began. So go back to the year 1995. I was ready to complete my master's, that was in chemical engineering, and it was up in north in Edmonton, Canada. And so my thesis was all done, and I had some time, really nothing to do. So I said, okay, I had done enough in engineering library. So I went to this Library of Humanities called Rutherford Library, and was looking into the Indian section. And lo and behold, and not a surprise to many who have been to many of the American libraries, you will see almost any good university library, you will see a collection of the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute critical edition of Mahabharata. You'll see many others, but definitely you will see this. Again, so I was going through it and just see how much I can understand. There is no translation there, just Sanskrit verses. So I was trying to see how much I can understand, just quickly reading through it without the help of dictionary and whatnot. And as I was going through it, I was looking for the Bhagavad Gita portion, which is again Bhishma Parva. And so I started with the first chapter of Bhishma Parva. And I was surprised because the first chapter is just the beginning of the war, before even the war began, actually. And I ran across a series of astronomy observations. Now, this is 1995, and my knowledge of astronomy, especially Indian astronomy or astronomy in general, was very limited. I mean, I have heard some names of nakshatra, but if somebody would have asked me to show them in the sky, I would have been clueless. So I was reading this list, second chapter, and I stopped at one observation. And the reason I stopped, because while I could not understand many of the other observations, I mean, I understood their literal meaning, but not sure what to do with it. This observation was the observation, now famous observation of Arundhati Vasishta. Ya chaisha vistruta rajas trailoke sadhu sammata Arundhati tayapesha vasishta prushtata kruta. So I said, okay, Arundhati Vasishta, I understand them. And the reason was me growing up in the villages of India. I was fortunate to have a very clear sight of the sky at night, and my teachers had shown me the Saptarshi and also the Arundhati and Vasishta. And what was so intriguing about this observation, which with my limited knowledge of Sanskrit, I could understand, is that Vyasa is telling to Dhritarashtra that at this time, which is just before the war, Arundhati is walking ahead of Vasishta. Now, that by itself didn't mean much to me, but I said, okay, that's interesting. What's the big deal about it, And then I started finding out more about it, and I ran into a wonderful professor. He was a professor of mathematics, now he passed away a few years ago, Professor Mangesh Murdeshwar. He was professor of mathematics. I was in chemical engineering, but I just mentioned it to him with a curiosity if he happened to know anything. And he said, yes, he has heard about it somewhere. And then I went to his place, and he gave me a few books of previous Mahabharata researchers. And that's how the journey began. So when I started finding out, I started in the two different ways. One is to read works of previous Mahabharata researchers. And in parallel, I started thinking about this Arundhati Vasishta observation. Now, again, I don't want to go into the nitty-gritty details of that observation, but what essentially it said is, in our times, Vasishta is walking ahead of Arundhati, and at the time of Mahabharata war, it was the other way, meaning Arundhati was walking ahead of Vasishta. And I thought, very naively, of course, that this should be easy to solve, just find out a little bit of astronomy, find out their relative speeds, and piece of cake. Well, it wasn't piece of cake. It took me about 15 years before I could solve the mystery. And I wasn't just sitting doing other things and let the time pass. No, I was very persistently, almost I was crazy after this observation. And I was looking for various astronomy software to see if I can figure out what does actually this thing mean. Then I moved to Calgary. I started a job with General Electric. So I was doing my work. I was selling plastics. But I used to go, I found out the Department of Physics, Astronomy, went to the university there, found the appropriate professor, and just, went there uninvited and tried to ask them more questions. And fortunately, they were helpful. They didn't understand what I was after. Another anecdote worth telling about this is when I was being interviewed for this, my first job with GE. I had done a couple other jobs in Canada before that. These people, the interview, I think it was a second or third interview, and the interview was at the Toronto International Airport. And so I'm being moved from one terminal to another. I'm meeting different people. And one of the person that I met, and I spent longest time, more than like 4 hours with him at the airport. And of course, afterwards, he was my colleague. His name, again, a phenomenal personality, Sherwood McLernan, again from Toronto. And why I'm telling this story is because it's hilarious, and it hasn't gone away from my mind. And so he's asking me questions, and I'm hoping that he will ask me questions about my sales experience, which I had none, by the way, but about my plastics background, which I did have because my master's was in polymer characterization. But he will ask me about some other aspects of my personality. And he just did some basic questions, but really he was saying, tell me more. What other things excites you besides this, besides this work, besides this? And I was really wondering, where is he going with all this? But finally I ran out of my stock to tell him. And so I said, okay, this is not relevant to this particular assignment. And so I said, well, there is one intriguing observation in the old epic of India, and I gave him the whole story. And it so happened, I'm just telling you guys, these are short, small miracles. He was into astronomy himself, and so he said, tell me more. And he could relate to at least what I was telling him. I said Arundhati, Vasishta, and he could immediately tell me the corresponding names from Western astronomy, like Alcor and Mizar. And so, anyways, I'll move on from that. But what is interesting is 15 years later, more than 15 years later, and when I wrote my book, When Did the Mahabharata War Happen? The Mystery of Arundhati, and I'm sure most of you have seen this, I sent him a copy. And he no longer works in that area, and I don't longer work in that area either. And he said, I remember what you were saying, and so you were definitely after this. So it's a nice anecdote, in terms of, and he was impressed that I never gave this up on this Arundhati and Vasishta. So anyways, I want to go 5 more minutes. So it started with this observation on 8th of May 2009. Finally, I figured out the mystery. I actually figured out that can be tested objectively. Any one of you can go to the simulation and find it out for yourself. Any one of you can actually do the mathematical calculations and find out that this is true. That Arundhati actually in the past was indeed walking ahead of Vasishta. I'm not going to go into the details of the phenomenon. It's in my book, it's on my blog, and there are many presentations on the YouTube. But that night, 8th May, on Friday, I was working on this late into the night until 2:30 or so. And when actually finally I figured out, I was doing mathematical calculations, who is ahead of who, using right ascension and some astronomy quantities. And when actually I saw the number that I was looking for, I couldn't believe that this is true. I thought maybe I'm delirious, It was 2:30 in the morning. So I made a big pot of hot ginger tea and sat down again and calculated these things again until 5 o'clock in the morning to convince myself that I wasn't hallucinating. So that's how it started. And then I said, all right, so I have done this, but if I could do this, these all great Mahabharata researchers dedicated to it in academia and otherwise, and I was just a novice doing this thing on the sideline, they must have done this before. And to my surprise, I found that out of more than 130 different researchers, hardly anyone has even mentioned this observation. In fact, there are only 4 researchers who at least bothered to mention it. And one of the researchers, Dr. P.V. Vartak, he had tried to test this observation to see why and when Arundhati would go or would have gone ahead of Vasishtha in 3 different ways. And, he didn't succeed. He didn't have any access to software. He was doing everything manually. And the trick was to find out what truly it means to say that it goes ahead of Vasishtha. Now, there are those people who are familiar with astronomy, you know what that means. But, there can be different interpretations. I mean, especially when you don't know. Galileo has said, the trick is to make the discovery. Once somebody makes the discovery, everybody can understand what it is. But the point is to make the discovery. And so that's the challenging part. Anyways, so I could make that discovery. And then when I realized that nobody else has addressed this observation, that is when I initially thought, okay, at least I should write a white paper. So I started writing a white paper. So I was looking for reference material from other researchers. And then I realized, especially when I started reading their works, I was glad that there were hundreds of these people, hundreds of these researchers who have done this work. But it was also disappointing, I don't know if that's the right word, that many of them, and I see that now as a widespread phenomenon, where majority is unfortunately ignorant of the basic scientific methodology. And I'll just give you one example, and then let's see if we can get into questions. I'll just again use, if you think of a theory or scientific theory and evidence, you can think of 4 or 5 key things. For example, what is the statement of your theory, Siddhanta? Okay, so for example, if you go to Johannes Kepler, what is his theory? The simple statement is that he will say all the orbits of all the planets are not circular, but they are elliptical. So you can say the statement say the main theme of a theory in a single statement. All right. If you ask Newton what is the key thing about his theory, and he would say that there is a attractive force between the masses, and there is a specific formula how they are related, the mass and the distance between them. If you ask Copernicus what is the key point of his thesis, he would say, well, not Earth at the center, but the sun at the center of now what we call solar system. So all the theories should have a simple statement. And what I found with these researchers is that I couldn't find one single statement. In fact, it wasn't there. What they were doing was a patchwork, trying to explain every observation in every different way they could. And that is still a worthy effort, especially when there are more than 200 plus astronomy observations. And this is not like fitting those of you who are mathematically minded. This is not fitting like a nth order polynomial, like, lots of data points and you're drawing a curve going through those data points. It's not that simple. It has layers. In fact, the analogy now I use is, imagine you are creating a painting, so initially just a plain surface, and you may sketch with a pencil. So that's like a certain evidence allows you to sketch your painting with a pencil. And then you think of another set of evidence, again, all astronomy evidence that I'm referring to, that allows you to add certain objects, and then some other set of astronomy evidence that allows you to add colors, then another set of astronomy evidence that allows you to add different shades, gloss, and so on. So it's a different type of, a complex type of jigsaw puzzle. And so you can understand the different creativity that was employed by various Mahabharata researchers. That's all fine. But imagine this. I'll take two key points of scientific method. One is the evidence, and another one is testability. So evidence, it's you think it's a common sense that one should use all the relevant evidence in the context of a specific theory. And the second part is that it should be objectively testable. But what is important is that you test all the astronomy evidence, in this case astronomy evidence, all the relevant evidence, and you summarize it. Which of the evidence supports your theory, your proposal, and which of the evidence does not support your theory or proposal. And what I found, 99% of these researchers, is they had selectively picked the evidence. And just to give you an analogy, imagine you have lots of data points and you're drawing a straight line through those data points. Even if you close your eyes and draw one line, it will go through few data points, especially if you have lots of data points. And their approach was very similar to this, that as if they drew a line, and whichever data point fell on that line, they said, oh, look, these data points fall on my line, so whatever I'm proposing is good. Unfortunately, that wouldn't stand anywhere in a scientific method. So that's when I felt, I need to write this. And I did not know, other than writing research papers or essays for the exams, I never thought of myself as a writer. So I did not know if I would able to write. So I started with a white paper, and it took me 2 years. So I discovered this mystery of Arundhati in 2009, May 2009. And it took me 2 years. 4th June 2011 is when I published my book, When Did the Mahabharata War Happen? And the rest is, of course, the history, but also history in the making. And I sent copies to various Mahabharata researchers, as many as I could find, identify, locate through physical address, through email. And I sent them my books, either e-copies or paperback. And I heard from maybe 2 or 3 of them. Since then I said, please, find holes in my arguments. And there are many who have actually done a great reading from my book and have brought up some of the objections, which either I could respond, or actually I ended up rewriting, not in the book, but refining some of the corroborations or some of the objective testing that I had done. And I should mention one name, that's Shri Prabhakar Fadnis. He was 85 years old, and I say he was because he passed away very recently, just a month ago. And I would say he read my book like nobody else. He must have read it many times. And again, many other readers write me through email and these days through Facebook, telling me that they end up reading my book many times. It's not a one-time read, and every time they read the book, they get something more that they missed a previous time. All right, so what I want to do is, again, I can go on and on about this book, but it would be really nice if you start asking questions, and I'm going to go here, and let's see what I find. Okay, so it's time, folks, to start asking questions. I do have few questions that I received before, and some of them said they may not able to join. Okay, so bear with me. This is my first Facebook live chat, and I'm going to take a question from let's see. The first question is not a question, could be a comment. Let me see. So bear with me, guys. Okay. So let's see here. Okay. So I see one from Jijit Nadumuri Ravi. I know him very well. He is also part of this Indic book club. Very dedicated person to dharma in general, but history and about the Indic traditions and various aspects of Indic tradition. So he quoted the words there, and I'm sure you may be able to read that as well. Okay, and so he is saying Arundhati and Vasishta seems to have misled me. I mean, he's saying misled you. It is so that's good. You know, I mean, I think we need a critic, and that's how these theories progress. Number of you may not know this, and actually many of you would be aware that in spite of extremely dynamic and revolutionary theory of gravity, for more than 150 years after Newton, the theory was not accepted by a good number of individuals, even those who had a scientific learning. So what happens when a revolutionary theory comes? It really shakes the foundations for many of us. And it takes us time before we get comfortable with the new reality. So anyways, let me read his question. So he says, it's only a single verse, which means Arundhati keeps Vasishta on her back. The immediate verse 32 says the other sign is another astronomy observation. So, okay, so I'm not going to read Jijit. It's great that what you have written. It could be a great comment for others to read, and I will read that afterwards. But what I would suggest is, please, all of you, when you ask question, please ask question. If you want to give a comment, that's fine, but it's more appropriate to ask questions here. And please ask a question that is like 2 lines, you know. So, and I'll give you a hint. The good questions, the great question starts with when, what, why, where, how, etc. I mean, I'm not going to read the whole comment of Jijit. I'm going to go down to see if there is something that I can address on this call. Okay, he admires my dedication. That's fine. Let me see if there's a point. This is my advice as a friend and well-wisher. We remain friends irrespective. Okay, so there is no question. So summarize, he doesn't agree with my work, but the bigger problem really is, has he read my work? And he has not told me that he has read it. So Jijit, I would encourage you to read my work. There are many who have actually read multiple times, and they have critiqued my work, and that has benefited me a lot. And I have refined some of my corroborations and experiments. So anyways, you can read his comment. Let's go further down. This is from Arya Prakash Dash, and please forgive me if I'm not saying your name correct. Who is the strongest opposition you had seen with a different claim, and what was their claim? Great question. Did you debate and convincing? Okay, so this is from Arya Prakash Dash. So there are 3 questions, great questions. First question, who is the strongest opposition you had seen with a different claim? I would say, now the strongest opposition in what sense? There are 2 senses. One is, of course, the content, you know, the quality of an argument that they have made. And the second is the noise that is made around it. The first question, in terms of the quality of argument, let me think. It's a tough one, but tough one because I really don't think there is any strong opposition out of these 130 different claims. But if I have to pick 1 or 2, which at least have understood the methodology, and they may not have even come up with a final date, but they understood why they could not come up with a final claim. We have to go back actually 100 years. Guys, I'm not kidding. We have to go back by 100 years to a work of great astronomer. Now, when I say great astronomers, a number of you may not have heard the name, but if you have, lucky you. Shankar Balakrishna Dikshit. He was a contemporary of Lokmanya Tilak and also good friend of Lokmanya Tilak. And his books, great books on the history of Indian astronomy, first written in Marathi, then translated in English by others. And those are still considered as a great treatise on this subject. And he gives a very good treatment of this chronology issues. Now, he doesn't come up with a specific date. He evaluates a work of another researcher named Lele, and I have not seen his original work of Lele, so I don't know. So that's one work. The second work, I would say, coming from 1960s or so, is by Bharat Ratna Panduranga Vaman Kane. And he wrote a book on totally different subject, History of Dharma Shastra. But in one of the volume, I think volume 3, he discusses that work, and again, doesn't suggest a specific date, but please go ahead and read it. It's available in PDF and in archive.org, and you will see how detailed and how methodical he is. And the third I should mention is Dr. P.V. Vartak. Now, he used different theories to explain it, but the reason he was forced to, because before my work, he is the only, and to this date, besides me, he is the only Mahabharata researcher, doesn't matter which field, only Mahabharata researcher who has taken into account all the astronomy evidence. Everyone else, bottom line, just found few data points that will fit their timeline and move on with it. So that's the answer to your first question. The second one, and what was their claim? So, well, Shankar Balakrishna Dikshit did not have a specific claim, but based on some star positions, and I won't go into the detail, I'll encourage you to read his book. And you definitely need some astronomy background to understand what he's saying. He has proposed, well, it could be as far back as 7,300 BC, but he wasn't putting any specific timeline. Panduranga Vaman Kane, he explored all the evidence, and he said, well, we can't really make a judgment call, and obviously that did not include Arundhati Vasishtha observation, and I'll make mention some other observation too. And the last question is, did you debate and convince him or them? Well, that's a great question. I encourage all Mahabharata researchers, the current Mahabharata researchers who are still around, especially those who have claimed a specific year of Mahabharata war, to come together and discuss, debate. We can do this through some communication like an email. I mean, we can start there anyways, but the better way even to actually get together in person, I suggest them do it on camera, do it off camera, do it in a moderated fashion, do it in a non-moderated fashion. A place of mutual convenience, a time of mutual convenience. And to this day, I have, nobody has come forward. One notable exception, and that is Dr. Konrad Elst. Now, and please, I will send you the link here of that debate, and you can watch it and make your own mind. But that's the kind of discussions we need, or debate, which is where both parties come together, they put forward their views, they actually debate, and leave it to the audience, leave it to the readers to decide, what they gain from this. So to your question, no, other than Konrad Elst, I haven't had a debate. Actually, sometime I do end up debating with few researchers. Recently, there was this researcher from Germany, Switzerland, Mr. I don't know if he's a PhD, so either doctor or Mr. Sri Dieter Koch. And he has either proposed on his own or picked up essentially a date of one named Daftari, and again, I'm familiar with all these claims. But then we started an email back and forward. He had copied me on his note. It went on for 2 or 3 rounds, and in my language, he ran away. Obviously, he would have a different story if you ask him. But what I'm doing is that communication that I had with him, I am putting it in small packets at my blog site. And on that count, I'll also mention I have a blog, which is at, you can just go to Google and find out, but nileshope.wordpress.com, and I have hundreds of small blog articles written, mostly responding to questions like these. Okay, so please, I'll encourage you to go there and read these. So Dieter Koch is another one that comes to mind. Professor Achar, he has proposed 3067 BCE. Now that is not his original date, just like Dieter Koch's date doesn't appear to be original. It's originally Daftari's date, you know. So Achar, coming back to Achar, it was proposed by Srinivas Raghavan in 1969, and he proposed with some additional astronomy observations. Some 15 years ago, as Professor Achar became aware of it, and so he started with the work of Srinivas Raghavan. But then he realized that there are many observations that really do not match, so he removed them. And then he thought there are 12 observations that do match for 3067 BCE, and he claimed, therefore, that is the date of Mahabharata war. And some of you may be familiar with another good filmmaker, Dr. Manish Pandit. He's a medical professional, but he has done some good documentaries. One is Krishna, the Myth or Reality, a good film. And there he uses work of Professor Achar and pushes that 3067 BC as the date. Again, we did not have a debate. I did have an email communication with Professor Achar since 2011, or even actually before that. But what I have shown, that the 12 observations that Achar claims, I have shown that each and every observation actually can be shown to falsify 3067 BCE. Not only it doesn't support 3067 BCE, but each of the observation falsifies. Okay, I'll stop on that. Let's see if we can find another question. Okay, Shantanu Eskambaker is asking, are there similar astronomical positions as depicted in Mahabharata before the simulation? Shantanu, can you rewrite your question? I'm not sure what you exactly mean by that. If there are similar astronomical position as depicted in Mahabharata before the simulation, I'm not sure what the question is. Let me move on to but you can rewrite your question. Let me go to the next question. This is coming from Pramod Kumar Buravalli. How do you explain the recurrence of the same Rishi over many time periods? Good question. Time travel or immortality, or same name recurring over centuries of a Rishi from the same Sampradaya? Okay. And you know, as I said, the questions do not have to be exactly about the chronology of Mahabharata, but this is relevant and related. So how do you explain the recurrence of the same Rishi over many time periods? So just let me give you a few examples. For example, Vasishtha. Let's start with Vishwamitra. There is a Vishwamitra Rishi to whom many Ruchas of Rigveda are assigned to. Okay, so we don't know how far back we have to go. Then, if you look at the story of Trishanku, there is a Vishwamitra who tried to put Trishanku into space. And I have determined the timing of Trishanku to be around, don't fall off your chairs, guys, those who are not familiar with this, but around 13,000 BCE. Okay, 13,000 BCE, which is around 15,000 years ago. Time of Trishanku, again based on various astronomy descriptions, astronomy observations from Ramayana, but also from Mahabharata. Anyways, so there is this Vishwamitra. Then you come to the timing of Ram, and again I have that my second book. Number of you may be aware of it, and again I don't want to talk about that book here, but the historic Ram that I wrote in 2014, I used the identical methodology to arrive at the timing of Ramayana and different instances of Ramayana. So in timing of Ramayana, I came up with as 12,209 BCE for the Ram Ravan Yuddha. So there also we have, I mean, the time of Ram, we also have Vishwamitra, and you will find Vishwamitra in Mahabharata also, which is 5,561 BCE, 6th millennium. You will find the same thing about Valmiki. Valmiki is, of course, the one who wrote Ramayana, that's 13 millennium BCE, but you also have Valmiki in Mahabharata. Same thing with Vasishtha. So the point is, how do we have these? Are these same individuals who are living that long with some yogic sadhana? Now we have heard about these stories, people living with some yogic siddhi. But here we know, actually we have descriptions, very clear descriptions. For example, take Vasishtha. It means the sage Vasishtha, and say, imagine start with the sage Vasishtha, whoever that is, for argument's sake. And his disciples would also be considered sage Vasishtha. His sons would be considered sage Vasishtha. His adopted sons would also be considered Vasishtha. And that is how we have these many Vasishtha, many Vishwamitra, many Valmiki, even frankly many Parshuram. So these are the descendants in the same either genetic succession or disciplic succession. All right, so hope Pramod, I answered your question. Let's go to Ameya Modak. Please discuss at least one Mahabharata astronomy seasonal reference which is not discussed in your book or on your blog if time permits. Okay. Ameya Modak is putting me on the spot. Okay, so I'll discuss a couple. So Mahabharata at least one Mahabharata astronomy seasonal reference. Okay. See, right now we consider Chaitra as a beginning of a month. And of course we tie that with the beginning of or the middle of spring season. Okay. Now because of the precision of equinoxes, it has shifted. But if we go back 2000 years, then month of Chaitra, lunar month of Chaitra, was indeed at the center or towards the beginning of spring season. In Mahabharata, there are no direct references, but many indirect references that gives us hints, okay, that Sharad Rutu was the beginning of a year. Now, it's important to keep in mind that that is true even in our times. For a minute, think of it. Of course, now we have more non-Indian calendars to the mix. So 1st of January is one beginning of the year. Which obviously was at some time before started with the winter solstice. But anyways, within the Indian tradition, we have multiple calendars almost prevalent at any given time. Almost at least 4 calendars, and you can see the hints for these in our ancient literature. One starting with the winter solstice, one starting with the summer solstice, and one starting with spring equinox and the fall equinox. Okay, but so in Mahabharata, there are enough clues that possibly the year started with the Sharad season. Okay, there is a big deal about Sharad season. And in the Shanti Parva, what you find, multiple places actually, is that the first month of the calendar of Mahabharata time, lo and behold, I did not know this for a long time. Even after I read Mahabharata 10 times, and I have read many more times, but it's amazing how much you will miss. That the first month of the year was Margashirsha at that time. You can find multiple references in Shanti Parva. Now I want to connect that with the season. Now come back to Bhagavad Gita, where in a 10th chapter, 10th Adhyay, Vibhuti Yoga, Krishna is describing himself as a Kusumakar, the season of flowers. And then he's also saying, Masanam Margashirshosmi, so among the months, I am Margashirsha. So just like in the mountains, Himalaya, again the rivers, he's a Ganga and so on. So if you put this all together, you will see that he's saying among the months, he's a Margashirsha. So naturally the question comes, why Margashirsha? And I have written a blog, again I'll encourage you to read, which is Kusumakar. It could be the season of flowers, so it could be spring season, but don't forget, it could be also the Sharad season. In fact, I am asserting that it was a Sharad season. That's what he's referring to, and also referring to Mrugashirsha as the month of Sharad season. Okay, also the beginning of a Sharad season, beginning of a year with month of Margashirsha. And if you put this all together in the context of the precision of equinoxes, lo and behold, it takes you to a time period 4000 BCE through 6000, 7000 BCE. All right, so hope, Amey, I gave you at least 1 or 2 or 3 references there. I'll go back to Shantanu's question. I mean to ask, were there similar astronomical positions even before mentioned in Mahabharata? Did you simulate it beyond the occurrence? Oh, okay. I hope I have tried to ask. Okay, so I will answer the question thinking what I have understood. So, for example, and Shantanu, if it's not, that's fine. You can write the question, and after this chat, I will still respond to that. People think, and that's true, that number of these phenomena, all astronomy phenomena, are recurring. Okay, they just get repeated after a short period of time or after a long period of time. Like Saturn will come to the same position every 30 years. Jupiter would do that every 12 years. Sun comes to the same position every year, once every year, and so on. But interestingly, this phenomenon of Arundhati Vasishta, or Arundhati walking ahead of Vasishta, is not a recurring phenomenon. Now, going forward, it will occur again 11,000 years from now. But as far as the past is concerned, it happened only once. And just to give you a time frame, I will say it happened only once in last 10 million years. I think that will be sufficient. You know, there would be no arguments as to if Mahabharata, what happened before that. Let's hope so anyways. So it is a very unique phenomenon, and that's why it's very powerful. But let me connect with something else. For example, I started with concern of Jijit Nadumuri Ravi that I have put too much emphasis on Arundhati Vasishta observation. Well, you have to know, you have to read my book, you have to know how science works, and you have to know the actually worth reading biographies of many great scientists to realize that how a single observation have made a revolution. And Arundhati Vasishta is not a exception to that. But fortunately, we don't have to just limit ourselves to Arundhati Vasishta observation. In the Mahabharata, and there may be a question, but I'll just, because on the topic, I will mention it. In the Mahabharata text, there are 23 plus specific references related to Bhishma Nirvana. Now, this has nothing, absolutely nothing, nada, to do with Arundhati Vasishta observation. Okay, so keep that aside. Just based on the 23 plus astronomy observations related, astronomy chronology observations related to Bhishma Nirvana, we can say with equal mathematical certainty that Mahabharata war did not happen even a day later than 4500 BC, 4700 BC, 3700 BC, and that's because I'm being extremely conservative to ensure that I covered every single possibility. So let's take 3700 BC, period. Not even a day later than 3700 BC, purely based on the set of astronomy observations related to Bhishma Nirvana. Forget Arundhati Vasishta. So Jijit, if you are still listening to me, and of course this video recording will come out, but you know, Jijit is asking on behalf of many others who might be having a similar concern. This concern is not founded in appropriate fashion. I would encourage them to read history of science last 400 years and see, so some names to throw in there: Kepler, Copernicus, Newton. If you go to electromagnetism, Faraday and Maxwell and Lagrange, guys, I mean, there's Einstein and so many. Just see, one observation has made a revolution. So that argument is not valid to begin with. Fortunately, we don't have to depend on one observation. Just set of Bhishma Nirvana leads to the same thing. Just now I talked about the Margashirsha as the first month, Margashirsha as the month matching with the Sharat season, Margashirsha as the month, or the Sharat season as the month of flowers. If you put together, again, it takes us to 4000 to 6000 BC and so on. Okay, let's see. Okay, Amey is writing again, one reference which doesn't corroborate 5561 BC, one which you haven't discussed yet in your book or on my blogs. There are no direct astronomy references. There is one reference which can be considered astronomy, and I have written on my blog. So you say not on my blog. So no. So let me answer, Amey, to your question. To the best of my knowledge, there is no reference. Now, I'm not saying that you won't find one. So please, this is a request to all. Anytime you read Mahabharata and find anything that is not included in my 215, and that is astronomy reference, bring it to my attention. Okay, and I want to test it. It should be tested against the 5561 BCE and see if it matches or not. So to answer your question, there is no reference that I'm aware of, astronomy reference or even relevant reference, that is not covered in my book or on my blog that disagrees with my timeline. There is none. Okay, that doesn't mean it's not there. I would encourage you to find it out. Okay, Elizabeth Pankaja Benik, again, forgive me if I did not say the name right. Lisbeth, so sorry, I haven't read your book yet. No doubt you treated this question. What is your take on the Kali Yuga timeline? Okay, that is, I'll make it short. That is a long question. Let me take a sip of a tea. Usually any question on the Kali Yuga, requires that. I have addressed this, tried to address it in my book in a very, in few pages. I also discussed this question of Kali Yuga or Yuga, and how does my timeline fit with the Yuga timeline? That's the broader question. Let me start with what Mahabharata has to say. Mahabharata has 5 or 6 different theories for the Yuga. Okay, now they don't necessarily agree with each other. So even if we have to pick one theory of Yuga from the Mahabharata, the question would be which one? Okay, so that's one. Then if you go outside Mahabharata into the Puranas, that's where this Yuga, Kali Yuga is more nicely, more broadly elaborated. What you will find is there are almost as many definitions, as many mentions of this Yuga system. And I have a whole long list of those references, courtesy of another great researcher and an extremely knowledgeable person, Shri Arun Upadhyayji. He is now I think retired IPS officer, and his passion is again Indian history and astronomy. And amazing, I mean, he can recall so many specific references from his memory, sheer memory, and he can write it. So he has kindly sent me a whole long list. So I have it. As many times it is mentioned, almost those many different definitions for the duration and so on. So again, the question is which one we take. I like the definition, one of the definition given in Mahabharata, where Bhishma says, connected to the Yuga, is Raja Kalasya Karanam. Like king by his behavior, by his administration, defines the type of Yuga that will come. We can all relate to that with the Karma Siddhanta and everything else. So depending on the situation, that's how the Yuga was called. There is an astronomy theory of a Yuga, which is to say this measurement was taken as, 2 types of measurement. One is the real measurement, the real time that we know. And another one is the movement of stars. And this is written by, again, thanks to Abhi Shivdas and Christina, who brought that book to my attention, by one named Sri Karnik, and I may be saying a wrong name. Actually, if you take his timelines for the duration of each Yuga, and if you assume the Kali Yuga began with 3102 BCE, my proposed timeline of Mahabharata falls into Dwapara Yuga, as it should, based on the multiple descriptions of Mahabharata text. And my proposal for the Ramayana, 12,209 BCE, falls rightly into the Treta Yuga, as is expected, based on the timeline proposed by Karnik. Now, there is no conspiracy here, guys. I don't know exactly who this Karnik is. Until a month ago or so, somebody brought it to my attention. I have not met him. But the point is, so yes, I can take one definition and it perfectly fits for my timelines. Now the question is, will people be willing to accept the timeline or durations proposed by Karnik? The answer is they won't be. They will be pulling all the other references, which is every other reference that will not agree with it. And that is the scenario for no matter which definition of a Yuga that you use. Okay, so I hope I have answered that. So it's not a question that we are going to solve it very easily. There are many dimensions to it, many theories about what this duration is, Daivi versus Manushi years, and it goes on and on. Okay, so let me move on. Okay, so Raj Vedamji from Houston writing, most well-meaning researchers might not like your date using Arundhati Vasishta because it invalidates the Puranic king list and the Feb 18 3102 BC date, start of Kali Yuga. Please explain by deconstruction. And why Kali Yuga cannot be pegged to 3102 BCE despite the reference by Aryabhatta and most Indic writers. Okay, so let me take it in stride here. So what Raj Vedamji is saying is most well-meaning researchers will not accept my date based on Arundhati Vasishta. And my broad answer to them is, first thing they have to explain, I mean, period, what is it about Arundhati Vasishta that they don't like? Because if they are throwing Arundhati Vasishta, the same rule would apply to rest of the 200 astronomy observations. Now, granted, there are interpolations and additions and so on, but just now I described, even if you keep aside Arundhati Vasishta and only look at the Bhishma Nirvana reference, still it is going to take you before 4000 BC. If you look at the references to Sharad season and Mrugashirsha, there are 30 plus, I'm just saying 30 plus, 40, 60 references to Sharad season, month of Margashirsha, and the timing of Mahabharata war. That by itself, again, nothing to do with Bhishma Nirvana reference, nothing to do with Arundhati Vasishta. It is going to take you beyond 4000 BC. And there are a few more, I won't go there. So don't have to limit yourself to Arundhati Vasishta. Now getting to the 3102 BCE, my position is, I don't know how Aryabhatta or if Aryabhatta decided that 3102 BC was the beginning of the year. What we do know is that this assumption or understanding that 3102 BCE as the beginning of a Kali Yuga, for whatever reason, did exist in India for a long time. For example, calendars, Indian calendars made as early as 1500 years ago or 2000 years ago, assume 3102 BCE as the beginning of Kali Yuga, for their calculation as a epoch, the starting epoch. So they use that. If you look at, now I'll connect that with the other one that you are mentioning as a part B, Raj Vedamji. Could the Puranic king list be incomplete? I'll come to that. But let's say the Puranic king list mentioned in Vishnu Puran or Bhagavad Puran, and they typically talk of 1000 years, 1100 years, or 1500 years between a certain king that historically we think we know their timing. And there is a challenge, there is a problem too. In fact, another great researcher, Vedveer Aryaji, has shown that those timings for our modern kings like Gupta and Maurya, there is a lot of confusion, and he has put some good work out there. But let me go back to 3102 BCE. So Bhagavad Puran or Vishnu Puran, we can also determine the approximate time when they were written or updated, at least updated. And that comes to around 1600, 1700, 1800 BCE. And from that, if you go backwards, you can see the assumption of whoever updated Bhagavad Puran or Vishnu Puran, that they were also assuming 3102 BCE as the beginning of Kali Yuga. So that assumption of 3102 BCE is an old one, and it is in India for a long time, at least I would say for 4000 years, because Bhagavad Puran also seems to be assuming that. But other than that, now if you go to the internal evidence of Mahabharata text, there's a mention of Kali Yuga and all that, but there is not a single reference that you can objectively test that will allow you to come to 3102 BCE as the beginning of Kali Yuga. So there is definitely a disconnect, and it needs additional research. We may find the answer, we may not find the answer, but that's my answer there. Okay, let's see. All right, I'm going down the list in this. Okay, now please, what I'm going to do is, if it's a comment or if you are providing me additional information, I am going to read that and I will comment on it after the chat. What I do want to do is address as many crisp questions as I can. Okay, so please, those of you who have joined, if you want to ask a question, ask a crisp question that typically starts with when, what, why, how, as some of the questions that I just read. They were great questions. And I will answer, even if I don't get a time to answer this during this chat time period, I will answer to them after the chat, okay? Because the questions will stay here. Okay, so Nilay Trivedi is asking, where can I find Mahabharata for reading? Many sources, but let's assume if you can read in Hindi, if you go to archive.org and type Mahabharata, and you are going to find the Gorakhpur Press translation in Hindi, and also with Sanskrit verses. So that's like a online source that wouldn't cost any money. It would be a great idea if you prefer to read in a book form, which I do myself, to order them from Gorakhpur Press. Okay, I think they come in 6 volumes, and again, it is not going to cost you much. Okay. So that's answer to your question. Mini Dhritarashtra, okay. Okay, Jijit Nadumuri is saying Bhishma Nirvan is beautifully correlated by Ashok Bhatnagar. All right, well, what I would encourage Jijit, since you seems to have connection with Ashok Bhatnagar ji, is to see if you can present his position, and then we can take it over. I don't know what you mean by beautifully correlated. I would encourage you to read my correlation, and basically what I've done on the Bhishma Nirvan, and you'll see how beautiful it is. Okay, and this is we are talking of objective research, so the beauty is in the eyes of beholder doesn't apply. Okay, so I would encourage you to read that. Right. Okay, Jijit is asking another question. How do you reconcile your 5561 BC war date with the Puranic king list? Very good. Glad you asked. And Raj Vedamji, you had asked this question, and I forgot to answer that. I'm going to, instead of giving a long answer, I'm going to ask all of you to read a blog that I have written at my blog site. And again, in response to Jijit's question, I'll type that particular blog link there afterwards. I have given a title, Tale of Two Unknowns. The problem with the king list, well, let's talk about the good of king list. The very fact we have these king list, the dynasty list, genealogies of kings. We have in the Ikshvaku dynasty, like many kings before Ram, many kings after Ram. We have the same thing with Pandava dynasty or Kuru dynasty, before Pandavas, many after Pandavas. So the fact that these lists are maintained, that is additional evidence for the historicity of Mahabharata. But the question is, how does it correlate with 5561 BCE? And I call this, my blog title is, blog article title, Tale of Two Unknowns. What are the two unknowns? The first thing we need to do this, we need an exact list of all the kings. And if you go to various lists, there is a list in Bhagavad Puran, there is a list, of course, in Mahabharata itself, there is a list in Ramayana, there is a list in Harivansha, and many other Puranas, we have this list, and other literature. What you will find is the list is not complete, number one. How do we know that? Because if you bring this identical sounding list from multiple sources, you find in one list between the two kings, there are many kings that are missing that are mentioned in the other list, and this goes on and on. There is something else. At least I found two lists, I can't recall now, Harivansha and maybe some other Puran, where it is very clearly stated that these are the list names of only prominent kings, which means even they are making it very clear that not only the list is not complete, but even by design, they are not into the business of mentioning every name. So that's one unknown. The second unknown is, in order to use the genealogy list to go back to the timing of Mahabharata or any other historical instance, you also need the duration for each of the king. Now, as a crude calculations, what many have done is they have taken this list of kings. Sometimes they have added some kings. Oh, maybe we are missing 20% or 30%, and then they have assumed a average duration, average time for the rule of each king. Now, these numbers go from 14 to 50. Okay, 14 years per average for each king to 50 years for each king. Now, everyone has made their assumption, and if you multiply the two numbers, you get a time period. What is interesting is if you have two unknowns, and if you have a specific final thing in your mind, a specific date, say 5561 BC, it's solving a simulation with two unknowns, guys. Those of you who have done this, you know what? We should be glad, we are glad that we have this king list. It does allow us to directionally put one king in terms of chronology, who is before who, and in that sense it's useful. We can also take guesses, just like people have already done, from 14-year average time to 50-year average time, and you can possibly calculate the ranges, how far back we can go. Having said that, you must keep in mind that we truly don't know the duration of each king, or even a decent estimate for what the average time was, and even if we have, what will it do? And the second point which I mentioned, that we don't have a complete list. So we are playing with the two unknowns. It's still useful in a relative chronology sense. It is not useful. It is actually dangerous for calculating, estimating the absolute chronology. Okay, so let's go down. Our Dr. Aparna Dhir is asking, as we find many theories hinted in metaphorical language in Vedic literature, do we have same pattern followed in Mahabharata as well? Well, Mahabharata has used a lot of metaphor. I mean, it's a epic poem. It's a Arsha Kavya, and naturally it has used a lot of metaphor, simile, analogies and whatnot. And we should use all that as a evidence, because if you go to, say, Patanjali, I mean, he in his Yoga Sutra, he says pratyaksha, anumana, agama, pramanan. So pratyaksha, anumana, and also the agama, which is the background knowledge, that leads you to your explanation or description, that is pramanani. And then if you go to Nyaya Shastra, then you have pratyaksha, anumana, upamana, shabda, pramanani. So analogies, metaphor can also be interpreted in arriving at some realization. But so I'll leave it at that. So yes, there are a lot of analogies, there are a lot of simile, metaphors, whatnot. It's left to us to figure it out in the context, if there is some secret knowledge or some esoteric knowledge capped into those metaphors. All right, let's go down. Manoshi Sinha is asking, the Mahabharata war date mentioned in your research work is different to dates mentioned by other researchers. What is your opinion on it? Well, the whole talk is about this. But great question again. And what I will say is this. It is good that we have so many researchers coming up with so many different dates, proposals for the timing of Mahabharata war. That is required in any research. If you look at quantum mechanics right now, in describing it, there are, last time I used to research into the philosophical issues of quantum mechanics many years ago. And last time, this was going back many years, last time I looked at it, there were 17, I did a review paper, there were 17 different theories in explaining quantum mechanics. So my point is, it's good that there are many proposals, because, all of these, they allow me to study what I might have done wrong, what they might have done wrong. But to answer your question, based on all that I have studied, I have more than 130 different claims, not all of them in the original, because actually some of them just mention the claim, oh, I think it's 3102 BCE. But just because that person happens to be some well-known person, it becomes like so-and-so is saying it happened in 3102 BCE. In science, it doesn't work like that. I mean, for every claim, you have to provide your evidence. So my point is, based on all that I have reviewed, I can say my 5561 BCE, originally proposed by Dr. P.V. Vartak, he did it in a different fashion. He did not look at Arundhati Vasishtha observation and so on. This is the best effort that is there in determining the chronology of Mahabharata war. Now, bar none. Okay, now this may sound as very bombastic, and that's fine. But you know what? If you look at Bhagavad Gita, the Daivi Prakriti or Daivi qualities, Krishna mentions Abhayam Sattva Samshuddhir Jnana Yoga Vyavasthiti. You have to be fearless in your claims. And of course, it ends with Amanita. You have to be humble about it. Okay, so the humble part is that I could be wrong. And if somebody shows this to be the case, I would be the happiest person. The reason is the day somebody proves that my date is wrong, which means he or she has come up with a better proposal, which means we have made a progress in understanding more about this Mahabharata war. The fearless part is based on my study. I feel very comfortable asserting that mine is the best proposal, the best type of quality research when it comes to determining the timing of Mahabharata war, and not limited to just astronomy evidence, even though I have focused in my book only on the astronomy evidence. Okay. Okay, Jijit, I see your question. I'm going to go down. I'll come back to you. I want to just make sure I take questions from others too. Okay, I'll come back to some question. Pramod is asking, was there ever an effort by our illustrious ancestors to sit down and give an undisputed chronology? Can it at least happen in our lifetime? Well, I don't know the answer to the second question, but to the first question, the undisputed chronology, to the best of my knowledge, I don't know anyone who has written it. But again, the reason is, if you consider the Indian view of Itihas, and recently I read a definition, one of the many definitions by Vishwa Adluri and Joydeep Bakshi, and I liked it. This was in the interview that came in the Swarajya magazine, and I can't quote this whole thing, but what they have said, I agree with it, as long as there is no such unhidden meaning behind what they have written. Yes, there is a concept of history is there, empirical data is there, but there is no overemphasis. And again, I'll take another question related to that, which I get all the time, which is somebody saying, but why are you so obsessed with the chronology of Mahabharata? Why not just only look at the spiritual aspect, the Adhyatmic aspect? And I don't know what to answer. I usually smile and walk away. But the point is, I don't know of any Mahabharata researchers who is working on chronology has anything against to say about the Adhyatmic aspect of Mahabharata. Okay, so there is no either or scenario. We have to focus on Adhyatmic aspect. There are so many other beautiful aspects in the Mahabharata, personalities, characters, amazing thing. You can pick one subject and you could be working for the rest of your life on that. So this is not obsession, but if we accept this as a history, as soon as we accept that this is something happened in the past, there is every reason to find out when it happened, or at least make an attempt, try to find out when it happened. Pramodji, I may not have answered all your question exactly. I'll try to answer after the chat. Let's see. I just wanted to know whether you have considered phenomenon of fall of Yayati from Swarga from Mahabharata text. To answer your question, no, I have not looked at it. I know some others have looked at it. One name I'll mention is Srimati Rupa Bhatti. she's working on Agastya, but she has worked on this, or at least trying to work on this. But I have not. Okay. And guys, we have to actually do one thing. Try taking one problem from any of our literature, Mahabharata, Ramayana, anything else, Rigveda, and try to solve it, and you will see how many levels deep one has to go before that magic happens. And we have to have that trust, because there is no guarantee that you may be able to solve the problem. But one guarantee is always there. Even if you don't solve the problem, you will always learn so much about that subject by simply trying to solve the problem. In fact, you would become an authority on that problem. Okay, so let's see. I don't see any more questions added below. So I can go down, and we will go for another 10 or 15 minutes. So if you have any questions, please type there, and then we will stop. Okay. So I'm going to go through the list backwards, and let's see. Okay. So Jijit, I'm coming back to your comment there. Please also see Dr. B.B. Lal's archaeology fieldwork. How do you reconcile your work with this? Okay, so that's a great question, Jijit. So let's understand what great Dr. B.B. Lal has done. He's now 96-year-old, and he started in the archaeology department. I have his 4 or 5 different books, including his autobiography and many other books that he wrote on the Saraswati and whatnot. So what he did is he started with Archaeology Survey of India, did a lot of field works at many sites. At some point, and by the way, I should mention that B.B. Lal is one of the great names. When he began his work, he had originally accepted the arguments of Aryan invasion theory, the so-called Aryan invasion theory. And then as he continued his work, in the light of additional evidence, he realized that the Aryan invasion theory is not tenable. Now that was purely based on the archaeology evidence, but also some additional evidence from Rigveda and additional archaeology evidence. So he changed his position, and you know what? Even in science, that happens very rarely. And then he rejected Aryan invasion theory. So that's his background. Now in 1950s, he did some excavation, he and his team, at the places which were considered related to Mahabharata. For example, Hastinapur and Kurukshetra and whatnot. So and Mathura. So Hastinapur, there's a place called Hastinapur or something like that, close on the bank of Ganga in the Meerut district. And so that's where he found certain area next to the river, and he did some archaeological excavation there. Now, Gigi's question is, how do I relate to this? Well, what they found is, some pottery. Some found some fish hooks and so on and so forth, different layers. Actually, the number of those layers, to the best of my knowledge, do not go anywhere below 2000 BC, based on the archaeological techniques they use to date these different layers. So how do I relate to it? Well, this is how I will summarize. There is a lot of archaeological excavations have taken place, not just limited to B.B. Lal, but in recent years, in the context of Sindhu-Saraswati civilization. And we are finding many more, like Birana is one, Rakhigari is another, and there are many more. I was at the Saraswati conference that Jijit, you were also there, and I forgot the name, but this person presented evidence from going back to again 2000 BC from Rajasthan, near Kalibangan, but west of Kalibangan. So there is a lot of new work is being done. How that relates to my date? So far, anything that we have found from archaeological excavation does not relate, does not relate to any descriptions of Mahabharata text. So just because we found something at a location, like say Hastinapur or Hastinapur, which is in our times we are identifying to be same as Hastinapur, we cannot just jump and see a pot there and say, okay, this pot was used by someone in Mahabharata times. So the problem I see is the problem of inferences. The problem is not of the data. The evidence, whatever archaeological excavation has found, is great, and is still going to tell us about our ancient civilizations and whatnot. But there is nothing that connects with the Mahabharata text. Now, I know the arguments have been made about PGW, the painted graver, or some other, new polished black pottery and whatnot. But where is the descriptions that is connected to Mahabharata? Even if, first thing, there is no description, no connection. But suppose you find it, for argument's sake. You also know that these potteries are found out, and especially with a new research, over a period of 1,000 years. So the pottery existed. How can you find a quick pottery and connect that with a historical event? And this is the challenge. This is the problem that's not limited to Mahabharata. This is the problem of Aryan invasion theory. So they find something in Central Asia. They find, in excavation, some chariot or a horse, and they immediately relate to Rigor or, the war. And, that has no connection. There may be a connection, but you need additional evidence before you can put this together as a jigsaw puzzle. So to summarize, there is no archaeology evidence that is being found that can be matched with the descriptions of Mahabharata text. And anything that is been found in the archaeological evidence does not contradict, does not falsify, does not conflict with my proposal of 5561 BC for the Mahabharata war. But that was a great question, Jijit. Let's see if I have missed anything. Okay. And bear with me, I don't know if when you type something, if it goes to the top. Okay. So if I see, unless you have new questions, I'm just going to go here. Okay, I see new questions there. Let's bear with me, stay for a few more minutes, and I'll try to answer a few additional questions. Arya Prakash Dash asked, have you considered any mythical characters like Yakshas, Daityas, and the Vimanas, missiles, etc.? They were very metaphorical, allegorical. How does it fit into your thesis? Does all these facts negate Mahabharata as a historical event? Again, a great question. Have you considered any mythical characters? Yaksha, Daityas? No, I have not considered Yaksha and Daitya. These are great subjects to look at. Vimanas, now I know there is a reference of Vimana in Mahabharata, like I'm going to say the wrong name, but this king fought with Krishna, Saubh, I think, or maybe the name of his Viman was Saubh. He fought with Krishna, and Krishna fought from the ground, and Dr. P.V. Vartak has given great descriptions of this and possible speculations, conjectures about what these individual military equipments could be. But that subject aside, I have not given any attention to these from Mahabharata. When it comes to Ramayana, the Pushpak Viman, and again, I have not given any attention because we don't have any evidence that is objectively testable. But let me make a couple of points related to this. How we make confusion, we confuse ourselves with the inference, how to draw scientific inference. A number of you may know this name, Jayant Nararikar, astronomer who worked with Sir Fred Hoyle and worked on a steady state model, as opposed to Big Bang model or expanding universe. Now, in somewhere in critiquing or whatever he's mentioned related to Ramayana, he said, I have not seen any drawings of the engine, the fuselage or jet engine of Viman, of Pushpak Viman. So unless I see such a thing, I'm not willing to believe in the Ramayana. And then by extended inference, therefore, Ramayana itself. So not just the Pushpak Viman, but the Ramayana itself. Now, what is wrong with such inferential logic? Just go back, say, 400 years and ask this question when the aeroplanes did not exist. And suppose this number of us, and we, in our previous reincarnation there, we were sitting below a tree and we were discussing this subject. What kind of evidence we would have demanded 400 years ago for the Pushpak Viman? We wouldn't have talked possibly about the drawings for the aeroplane or a fuselage and whatnot. So the point I'm making is what we demand as evidence, or how we draw the inferences, or what we can test. Any historical statement, can we test it, or our ability to test it changes with our knowledge, it changes with the technology. And so this journey will continue. But as of now, when it comes to Pushpak Viman, we don't have anything that we can test in an objective fashion. But until then, we have to take a statement. We don't have to say therefore Pushpak Viman existed, but then no one can come and say the Pushpak Viman did not exist because we don't have a diagram of its jet engine. All right. So let's see what else they had. How does it fit into your thesis? Does all these facts negate Mahabharata as a historical event? I will encourage you to read, to listen to some of my lectures where I do bring this point. It is a Arsha Kavya, or Ramayana is a Adi Kavya. And in a Kavya, or even in an ordinary writing, I mean, if you see the writings from the Second World War, or if you watch World War movies, what you will find is like a pattern and whatnot. You will find certain aspect exaggerated for a theatrical effect. The same thing will happen possibly with the poem. So yes, there could be a allegory, there could be metaphor, there could be exaggerations, and these all things are very natural to an epic poetry. But still, we can easily separate out the chaffs from the grain. And my multiple readings of both Ramayana and Mahabharata tell me that that is very much possible. It is possible. So you don't have to negate the entire Mahabharata just because you don't have, or we don't have, objectively testable evidence for a certain aspect or certain descriptions of Mahabharata. We can keep that aside. I mean, in a psychological sense, don't we do that with our fellow human beings? You know, certain aspect of personality of another individual, another friend, colleague, your family partner, you don't like, but you try your best to keep that aside and work with what you can. You know, it's the same thing here. All right. Rupa Bhattiji is asking, please do share your views on AV observation where the pole star with Saptarshi is not mentioned. But Ramayana mentions Saptarshi with pole star. Brilliant. Okay, now yeah, as one can see many stars. Okay, I don't have to name Rishi. That took curiosity. Okay, I'll just answer that top part, and the rest is your comment. So this is from Rupa Bhattiji. He says, please do share view on AV observation where the pole star. Thank you for bringing it up. This is very interesting, guys. In the Mahabharata, there is no mention of a pole star, meaning this particular being a pole star, or I'm looking at the sky and a pole star is shining brightly. Nothing like that. Now, some researchers have misunderstood. For example, a description that was meant for Mars. Okay, because the word Dhruva doesn't always mean a pole star. It means a sthira or a steady, you know. So Mars description, it says Dhruvam prajulitam goram apasavya pravartate chitra swatyantere cheva dishtitah parushagraha. So Mars has become steady between Chitra and Swati and shining brightly. It has gone retrograde. That is what the description is. And then it says Vakranu Vakram Krutvam Cha Shravane Pavaka Prabha Brahma Rashi Samavritta Lohitango Vyavastita. And that Brahma Rashi is Nakshatra Abhijit or Vega. Okay, so Mars came by the time of the war and aligned itself along Brahma Rashi. But there is no mention of a pole star. Arundhati Vasishta are walking around a empty space, so to say. But by empty space, I mean there is no distinct star next to the point of pole star, NCP, North Celestial Pole. There is no distinct star in Mahabharata times. That itself would eliminate certain time intervals. For example, around 3000 BC, Tuban, a very distinct star, was our pole star. But Mahabharata doesn't mention any pole star. On the other hand, as Rupaji asked me there to talk about it, you go to the time of Ramayana. Now, I came up with this time based on multiple references, 3-4 independent references from different kanda of Ramayana, and they led me to this broad interval of sometime from say 10,500 BC to 17,500 BCE. Okay, and one of the 4 references there, it refers to the North Pole star of Ramayana times. Isn't that interesting? The Brahma Rashi is described as the star, pole star, around which Saptarshis are rotating. This is the description from Ramayana. And using precision of equinoxes, if you go backwards, you find that the star Brahma Rashi Abhijit or Vega, different names referring to the same star, was our pole star, was closest to the point of North Celestial Pole, closest to the NCP in the year 12,048 BCE. And so from that point, plus minus easily 1,000 years, 2,000 years, even possibly 3,000 years, we would consider that the people of that time would have considered that as a pole star, because that's where it is. So Ramayana is referring to Brahma Rashi as a pole star, Saptarshis going around it. In Mahabharata, there is a description of Saptarshis going in around, Arundhati walking ahead of Vasishta, but absolutely no mention of a pole star. And then she is referring to additional comment of Agastya, which is also interesting, both in Ramayana and Mahabharata. So I'll briefly mention it, that sage Agastya is mentioned in Ramayana, also in Mahabharata. But through all these astronomy descriptions, especially Ramayana, where there is a journey of Ram to the south, okay, where the Agastya would be easily visible, there is a mention of Agastya sage in the Panchavati. There is a mention of Agastya during the war, but there is no mention whatsoever of star Agastya during the Ramayana times. And actually even in the Mahabharata times, by the way. But I'll skip Mahabharata for a minute. But Ramayana times, and why is that? Because at least my proposed time, 12,209 BCE, when in the northern hemisphere, Brahma Rashi, which is same as Abhijit or Vega, was a pole star. And do you know who was a pole star in the southern hemisphere, the southern pole star? It was Agastya. Agastya was closest, Agastya meaning Canopus, closest to the point of south celestial pole around 12,000 BC, and therefore not visible from India or even the South India. So this is a negative, this is an example, illustration of a negative evidence. Again, this is not to be seen as powerful as a positive evidence, but even there, it's amazing that Ramayana has a lot of mention of sage Agastya, but no mention of people seeing the Agastya star, Canopus, because it wasn't visible in 12,000 BC. Okay, quickly, and I want to stop in 2 minutes. Maitrani shares, okay, so Rupa Bhattiji is giving some additional comments, and I'll listen to that and I'll comment. Okay, Jijit, just last, let's see if there are any other questions. I'll take this as a last question from Jijit, or his comment rather. He's saying Dr. Ashok Bhatnagar is an astronomer himself, and his date of 1792 BCE for a Mahabharata war correlates well with archaeology and with Puranic king list than all the other MBH dates, including yours. Okay, this was appreciated by Dr. B.B. Lal, archaeologist. Professor Waldia discovered drying up Saraswati by 2000 BC. That is correct. The Saraswati did dry by 2000 BC, and some other scientist, Nalini Rao. Okay, Jijit, I mean, I'm going to see if I can find a question there. If not, I have to skip this. Okay, he says he will introduce me to them and would like to know my review of their work and their review of my work. Well, that's great. In fact, what we need to do, I think, as a next stage for all Mahabharata researchers, and that's because we are referring to Mahabharata chronology, but this applies to any other knotty problem, you know, tough problem in this whole space of Indic research, is that we should compile what different people have said about that problem and their solution, and critique it rationally, critique it brutally. Okay, and that's how we are going to make progress. But and I hope that this happens. What I am seeing is, and I don't know if Ashok Bhatnagarji or the other names you are mentioning, Nalini Rao, if they are on the Indic Book Club or some other forum. But you know, we can do this in a forum. We can do this one-on-one. And I know I recently received an email from Neera Mishra-ji, who organized this Mahabharata Manthan conference, and she said, you know, she's very keen on doing a 1 or 2 day seminar purely dedicated to astronomy based chronology of Mahabharata war, and want to bring multiple researchers doing this. And that's a great initiative. What is important to remember is that before even we get to that stage, there's a lot of pre-work. that we need to do, and specifically the pre-work I'm referring to, is that every researcher should able to clearly state the statement of their theory. For example, the statement of my theory for both Ramayana and Mahabharata books or works is that all the astronomy observations, astronomy descriptions of Mahabharata text and Ramayana text are actual, factual, visual observations of the sky. That is the statement of my theory. In a similar fashion, all of these researchers have to do the same. Then we talk of the triangle of the scientific triangle, the logic of scientific discovery, the explanation, prediction, and testing. So we need to make a list of all the observations. So we get into the agreement. Then we get into the agreement on the translation of it, explanation. And then we get into the predictions, actually everybody's predictions, which one match, which one do not match. There is a simple scientific tool known as verisimilitude or truth likeness score. And it simply looks at all the evidence for a specific category, in this case astronomy evidence, and splits it into two for every single proposal or theory. The number of observations that match, corroborate for that proposal, and the number of observations that do not corroborate with that proposal. And we just have that as a score, like a tennis score, 6-1. So if in my case, for my Mahabharata research, I looked at more than 215 observations. So let's stick to 215. And the verisimilitude or truth likeness score for my proposal, my theory, is 210 that agree with mine to 5 that do not agree for my timeline. And I know some of you would like to jump and say, oh, which are those 5? They are discussed in my book, but I'll tell you those 5 observations that do not match, or I cannot corroborate them from the Mahabharata text for my timeline. No other researcher, I repeat, no other researcher has succeeded in corroborating those 5 for their timeline also. On the other hand, those who I could corroborate, the other researchers have not crossed the barrier of 10 observation. I repeat, 10 observation out of 215 to go further to match for any of the timeline. So yes, Jijit, so that's a great idea, and you can take initiative and help us do that. That's great. And the Mahabharata war would be just starting point, because it's very critical, and we can move on to other serious problems in our Indic tradition, and we can make progress. Okay. All right. So with this, I am going to stop. Let me see. Yeah. So thank you very much for those of you who still stuck around. We went a bit over time, 10 minutes over time. I want to thank Hari Kiranji for taking this initiative to start various different proposals, different initiatives under this Indic Book Club, Indic Academy, and whatnot. I want to also thank Dimple Kaulji, who assisted me getting to this stage in doing this chat, Facebook live chat. And thanks to all of you for joining this. Those of you who asked questions and those of you who made these comments, that's how it enriches our discussion and makes us progress, expanding our knowledge. Okay. All right. So I want to stop here. I will go through the list after this talk. And if there are any questions or any comments that I did not have a chance to respond to, I will definitely respond, even if in brief. I will do that. Okay. So thank you very much again. I know it would be late night in India or wherever you are at your time, Sunday. So enjoy your rest of the Sunday. Thank you very much for joining me, and namaskar.